In a recent lesson, I defined the term linear pair, and in the definition, I used the words opposite rays. Well, now it's time to give a formal definition for opposite rays. You were probably able to figure out what opposite rays were, but here's the formal definition. Opposite rays are rays that lie on the same line and intersect in just one point. So here's our line, here's our point. In order for two rays to be on that line that only intersect in one point, turns out that point has to be the end point of each ray. So one of the rays starts at A and goes out to the right, so we can label that ray ray AB, and the other starts at A and goes to the left, and we can label that ray AZ. And we say that AB and AZ are opposite rays. And just to review, we can write this statement. Ray AB intersected with ray AZ is just point A, and the union of the two rays is the entire line ZB. Here's another definition, vertical angles. Vertical angles are two angles such that the sides of one angle are opposite rays to the sides of the other. So let's start with an angle, and let's take one of the sides and make the opposite ray as shown, and we'll do that with the other side. And now that we've done that, you can see that what we have is a pair of intersecting lines. And there's a pair of vertical angles as defined above. And it turns out whenever a pair of lines intersect, there's two pairs of vertical angles, and they're both shown. And now we'll number the angles 1, 2, 3, and 4 and write statements. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, and angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. And that's because they're vertical angles. And we have a theorem. Vertical angles are congruent. And we'll show the proof of that theorem. We set it up. We're given that we have a pair of lines that intersect in a point, which we'll call point A. And we're going to prove that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. By definition, you can see that angle 1 and 3 is a pair of vertical angles. Well, first we'll state the given that we were given that lines L and M intersect at point A. And then we can say that angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2 because they form a linear pair. And angle 3 is supplementary to angle 2 because they form a linear pair. And then it's a short proof. We've proven now that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because angles supplementary to the same angle are congruent. And so now we can go back to a diagram, and anytime we have a pair of lines that intersect, if we're given the measure of one of the four angles, we can find the other three. Angle 3 is 60 degrees because it's a vertical angle along with angle 1, and vertical angles are congruent. And then angle 1 plus angle 2 are a linear pair, so they add up to 180. So 60 plus the measure of angle 2 is 180. We can do that mentally. 180 minus 60 is 120 degrees, so the measure of angle 2 is 120 degrees, and therefore angle 4, a vertical angle, is congruent with that, and that makes angle 4 also 120 degrees. And let's go back to a diagram that was shown many lessons ago in a lesson about what we can assume when looking at diagrams. And we're not allowed to assume that angles are congruent simply because they look congruent. But now that we know what vertical angles are, from this diagram, we can assume that those two angles that are marked with orange arcs are congruent, and we can also assume those two angles marked with blue arcs are congruent. There's other angles in this diagram that look to be congruent, and in fact, I believe there's two angles in this diagram that appear to be right angles, but we're not allowed to assume that without being given some more information. Because of what we now know about vertical angles, we are allowed to assume that the two angles marked with orange arcs are congruent and the two angles marked with blue arcs are also congruent. In this lesson, we looked at two definitions and a theorem. The first definition, opposite rays are rays that lie on the same line and intersect in just one point. Vertical angles are two angles such that the sides of one angle are opposite rays to the sides of the other. And a new theorem, vertical angles are congruent.